how can we be who we're meant to be based on the vision of our faith if we're denied the right to employ and engage people and even present the true nature of the human person?
When children are graded, asking them, which pronoun do you prefer? What do you mean? They are confusing kids unnecessarily.
Yes, ultimately, where we get our hope from as Christians is that Jesus is still on the throne. That's not changed.
That's what submission means. It doesn't mean being trampled down, but it means being a stakeholder. Leadership is action, not position.
We are here until, say, law, which allows babies to have the same rights as everybody else. And we're not going to go away. I can guarantee that we won't.
But we have to see the bigger picture. If we don't get everything we want, there's no reason to give up. You keep fighting more.
And the government have weaponized feelings, and they're effectively creating blasphemy laws to outlaw Christianity, the foundation of our nation.
May we continue to boldly stand as a light in the darkness, a voice for truth and a force for good.
Hello everyone, welcome to Here I Stand, a podcast by the Young Conservatives for Christ. And yes, we have rebranded the podcast, and as of this episode, it is now again available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so go check it out. And we've got some more announcements coming up in the future weeks and months, so be looking at our social media, which is linked in the description, so you can stay on track. And today I have a very special guest, DaveRightNow. And let's welcome Dave right now to the Here I Stand podcast. Dave, thanks for coming on. Do you want to give a quick intro about yourself for those who don't know you?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here on the podcast. I'm a conservative commentator, right-leaning. Labels are tricky nowadays on this whole political sphere, but I'm sort of a Christian with sort of traditional Christian views on things. And so I saw a gap in the market here in Australia as far as commentary and people sort of standing up for the things I believe in the media sphere. Obviously, mainstream media doesn't do much favors for people like me. And even on the independent media, I didn't see a lot going on a couple of years ago when I started exploring this avenue. So I originally started with a channel that was more focused on men's stuff called Mostly Man Things. But then with the voice referendum and everything, I realized I was a bit more broadly political than just the men's column. So I rebranded to DaveRightNow to talk all things politics and culture that I think are important, and try and give people a different perspective on things that maybe they're getting from the headlines.
Yeah, that's great. It's been really interesting to hear your discussions that you've had, and it's really good. Now let's get into this discussion. And in the past few years, and in recent months, the question of Australian identity has become a major talking point, especially in conservative circles. And Dave gave his 2 cents about this a while back, and I wanted to have him on to discuss it a bit further with this issue. And I think the question we're trying to answer today is, what does it mean to be Australian? Because that sort of defines how you live and how different policies are defined, to be honest. And I think we'll start with multiculturalism, because this has been one of the things that has been pumped up in Australia. We're the most successful experiment of multiculturalism in the world. Victoria is one of the most multicultural states in the world. But I think multiculturalism hasn't done us any favors whatsoever. And I think as a starting point, I think multiculturalism, the problem with it is that you can't have different cultures that have different values trying to live in harmony, because they automatically disagree with each other. We can see what's happening with the Middle East. That's been going on for centuries with Israel and the Arabs, between the Jewish faith and the Muslim faith. They have completely opposing ideals, and that affects how they interact with each other. Dave, what do you think about multiculturalism?
Yeah, I think, for starters, you mentioned you sort of Victoria as a multicultural melting pot. I think it's great to see that Victoria is so inclusive of different cultures that you now provide special bins for their machetes. I think that's an amazing development down in Victoria. I think that's going to solve everything. Yeah, I think, like you said, it's around what you believe and cultural beliefs and multiculturalism. Like, two things can be true at the same time, but also not everything can always be true. Like, if there's two people with countering beliefs, like one says the earth is flat and one says the earth is a ball, they can't both be right. So there are some immutable facts around things that people, like, there's no compromise there. One is right, one is wrong. One that can work, one can't. And what we see with multiculturalism, and is we're told, no, everything is okay. Everyone can agree, everyone can align. And I think the real damage that has happened in Australia is, since multiculturalism was declared a net positive back in the 70s or 80s, we've actually been told to suppress our own culture. And I think that is the biggest failing of it. It's not a case of celebrate, enjoy, endorse, integrate other cultural aspects, which is fine. If people want to come from other cultures and, retain some of their habits because that's celebrations that are important to them through generations, that's okay. But that doesn't supersede and trump Australia's culture and the things we're building here in Australia. And yet we've been told, hang on, if you want to assert Australian things as better than the multicultural things, then you're some kind of racist bigot. That's the sort of impression and narrative we get given, that we have to be less in order to do that. And you even hear Chris Min saying, we can't even have free speech now because multiculturalism here in Sydney.
Yeah, and I think we're often reduced to that idea that we're bigots just because we don't like multiculturalism, when in fact we're in favour of having people from all different countries coming to Australia and living here and contributing to our society, as long as the Australian culture and the beliefs and values that come along with that are put as their first priority, because that's what makes a society. A society is built on shared beliefs and beliefs that actually make sense.
I think, and I've been thinking a lot about this because, I do content about it. I get a lot of comments on YouTube and on X that some people are very vocal, and we are seeing more of the sort of further, like, as much as I don't like using the term far right because it gets overused a bit, but we do have these people, the ethno-nationalists, really coming out now and becoming a lot more vocal. And I do understand some of the reasons for that around, no one else is listening to them. And they see this group that actually identifies the issues and will talk about them. So that does draw people. If our national so-called leaders refuse to talk about these issues, people are drawn to someone who might have an answer, who actually recognizes there's an issue. So we are seeing that sort of magnetism towards that thing. But if we go back to where this started in the 70s and 80s, sort of post-World War II, it started off, we still had white Australia policy, and we can get into the white ethnic stuff as we go through this. But we were bringing in people that were ostensibly from similar compatible cultures. That was kind of the intent of that policy beyond skin color. Now, maybe some of the forefathers were very ethnic racist, and there's different reasons for that. I'm not going to, we can discuss that. But I think Australia, think about Australia comparable to other nations around the world. We are like one of the youngest Western nations. We are one of the youngest modern nations in the world. Even America's got an extra 200 or 300 years on us, really. They sort of got going in the 1600s. We didn't really get going until the 1800s. And we didn't federate and become like a country until 1901. And then 15 years later, there was a world war. 15 years after that, there was another world war. And then there was like, so Australia, as far as our identity, we were just working out what our cultural identity was. We were coming out of, the gold rush and then into federation and then into wars and then into wars. And I think through the 60s, 70s, we really started building what Aussie culture was into the 80s. And if you look on social media, whenever people reminisce about the height of Australia's glory days and the golden era of Australia, it's all stock archive footage from the 80s and 90s. Maybe a little bit of 70s for the music scene. But that's where people see that 80s, early 90s. And that is kind of when they opened the floodgates to sort of much bigger numbers of immigration and said multiculturalism is what we are. We are now a multicultural country. And so I think whether it was deliberate or an accident, that actually started diluting a culture that was barely set. Like if you think about pouring concrete, the concrete's got to take time to set and solidify. And I think cultures are like that. And Australia hadn't quite set yet when we just started pouring more stuff on it. And mixing it up a little bit. Whereas, other countries, have had centuries and thousands of years, millennia in some instances, in order to establish who they are, what they stand for, where their borders were, what they fought for, what their ancestors have been through. Even to the point, America being younger, they've fought civil wars within their country, for their country. They have this sort of strong tie and belief of who they are as Americans that rejected the British, and that's part of their core narrative. We just don't have that here. And as we were building our foundations, they got washed away. So that's where I've landed on some of this multiculturalism and the issues and where it's from.
Yeah. And I think in that regard, we don't have, we're not as nearly as patriotic as America is. America is very much, so much more patriotic, a lot more politically focused, but also I think they know a lot more about their history compared to Australia. Like I know I know for me, I didn't learn a huge lot about history, but again, history is made boring these days. It's not that interesting. But then there's also now the revisionist side of history where you need to hate your history because you're a white colonist or like the Aboriginals were wiped out by these white colonialists, but the whole side of the issue isn't considered, and then we're brought back to this issue, and then we're saying, because you disagree with us, that means you're a bigot. But there's no backing behind that. We're really just trying to find a balanced position where we can find common ground with people, and then and find ways for people to assimilate into our culture, because we want them to experience the great culture that we have here. But now our culture is being reset as we see it, like on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We saw this week all the people marching on a war that we're not affected by against a democratic country in favor of a terrorist state, if you can call it a state. It's absurd to think why that's going on, but mass migration has been a topic that is in this issue. What do you think mass migration has done? Because migration has been high recently for quite a few years now. Do you think that maybe that's created ethnic enclaves, or maybe our assimilation policies got weaker because we're bringing in so many people all at once?
Yeah, I think like I grew up in Perth over in WA, and I don't know what it's like now because I've been here on the East Coast for over 20 years. But when I grew up there, we didn't have the obvious ethnic enclaves like places like Sydney and Melbourne particularly have, where that suburb is primarily people of this ethnic origin or background, etc. Right? Perth didn't really have that growing up. Everyone was kind of mixed in everywhere. There was no the sort of the where the Chinese were. There was no where the Italians were. There was no where the Greeks were. Like we didn't have those pockets where the Lebanese were. Where here in Australia, you go, okay, we know Auburn is primarily lots of Lebanese, so on. Down there, you've got like where's one of the enclaves down there for like the Italians or something. Like you've got I can't remember my Victorian geography, but like right. they've got these places, and I think with mass migration, what we've seen is people have moved in so quickly in such big numbers. They do associate and they do move into these suburbs together. Up here in Sydney, up in the northwest of Sydney, we're seeing a lot of people from Indian background moving in entire suburbs being very heavily Indian concentrate, which is changing the look of the suburb. Established suburbs are getting a lot more Indian grocers and restaurants and so on, which is changing that. But I think it means that culture, they can remain within their culture. There's no need for them to assimilate into Australianness and Australian culture because they can continue to talk in their language and do similar things because there's so many of them. They're afforded that option to do that. Whereas if, a family comes over and they're somewhat isolated from their home country, they kind of have to fit in and make it work. Because what option are they going to have? It's that, or they have no friends and they're lonely forever. So I think that's the difference. When you have people coming in a stream that's manageable, then they kind of have to settle in or stand out and be completely isolated. When they come in such big numbers, they don't have to integrate and adapt as much. Now, I'm not saying that's all of them. Obviously, these are broad, sweeping generalizations, and there are individuals that do come over and really want to love Australia. But we are seeing a trend. And, people like Pauline Hanson, who cops get bad rap, and no one's perfect, but she was the canary in the coal mine back in her maiden speech back in the 90s, where everyone decried her as a racist, because she said mass immigration back then from China and Asia was going to cause all these problems. And she was ahead of the curve. No one want to listen to her. They just want to say, you are racist, because how dare you say that Australia should have borders and actually respect Australia and Australian culture and Australian things. And again, it just comes back to that, using that sort of sense of trying to shame you into silence.
And I think it's interesting that if we talk about a place like Japan, like they won't get shamed for having a pretty Japanese culture that's like almost completely like just Japanese, or any other culture that's like that, where the cultures are untouched by other cultures and they preserve what they have. But if we do it, there's some sort of problem. But why should there be a problem? It profoundly doesn't make any sense.
There does seem to be a double standard, and maybe it's because we are such a young nation. They figure, okay, well, we're multiple clay. How you can't stand on your reputation as having this culture, because what are you? You just turned up, like you barely been there. And I don't know whether that's some of the argument people have had for it, but it is. You're right, and other established cultures that have had generations and centuries to establish who they are and what they are. There's no question of that. I think I saw the stats. I can't remember them exactly off the top of my head, but I think Japan is only 1 or 2% foreign-born people live in Japan. Australia is now up over 30% of our population was not born in Australia. And so when we think about what is Australian culture, and if we do want to harken back to the 80s, we've got a problem, because 30% of people weren't born in Australia. And so some of them might have been moved back then. So a small percentage of that 30% may have experienced Australia in the 80s. But many of them probably haven't, given the levels of migration we've had in later years. So a large chunk of people don't even know what classic Australia is. Or then there's, the generation, which I assume you're part of, John, that didn't live through it either. And so you have no personal frame of reference. I'm fortunate enough to be old enough to have experienced some of classic Australia through the 80s and 90s. And so I have a frame of reference. I know what we've lost. I know what's missing. But we've got an entire generation of kids and people and adults now that don't have any memory of that. All they know is that economically things are tough, houses are out of reach. We've got all this. There's a lot going on at the moment. And so then when people go, well, what is Australia? What is Australian culture? A lot of people actually don't even have a frame of reference, because we've just been told to be multicultural for so long.
Yeah, that's right. I haven't lived through any of it. I don't really know what Australian culture is, except for the older stuff that I've watched. Like I watched Skippy when it used to be on TV, and like that was iconic Australian. You don't see anything comparable to that on TV these days. There's nothing absolutely comparable, and it's sad to see that part of our culture that we've lost. And I think now I'm curious what you think about how the more nationalistic people have talked about this, because there's been a lot of when you just need to focus on white immigration only, or Anglo-Celtic to preserve our culture. But to me, looking at that seems like race baiting to me. It seems, well, I'll just say it up front. I think it's racist just to say that white people are the only ones that can preserve our culture. I think that's profoundly wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and I cop a lot of flack online for this, because I had the audacity to say someone like Gout Gout, the bloke up in Queensland, who's just hitting sprinting records left, right, and centre for his age, classifies as Australian. He was born in Australia. He's been raised in Australian schools. He seems to, be pretty Australian as far as, culturally. Yes, his parents were Sudanese, and he's got very black skin. But I think he's been raised, and he goes to like Ipswich Grammar, so he goes to like a private Christian school. He's been raised in sort of with good morals and ethics. And you say that, and all of a sudden you're a traitor, you're a leftist shill. There's all these things that people say to you because he's not white. And I was doing live stream and getting random people up on the camera to interview. And I did accidentally get an NSN member up on my stream. And, I had a chat with him, and he was saying that, he would rather keep some Swiss backpackers that turned up yesterday in Australia than a third-generation bloke of Chinese origin. Wow. Because they're of a European stock. They talk about stock. They're so focused on sort of that sort of eugenics side of things. And I've spoken to people that aren't that extreme, but there is a lot of people out there, whether they really think about it or not, that do have a bias towards nature over nurture. And, that's a constant battle, and it's never all one or the other. Obviously, and any parent knows that you have multiple children, there's things about them that are just different. Like there is, you might raise them almost 100% the same as much as you can with two children born in different times, but you'll try and raise them very similarly to believe similar things. But there is a natural element of, what they're interested in, what they care about, their attitude, etc. But so much is nurture as well. And I think a lot of the ethno-nationalists, etc., they completely dismiss the nurture element of the argument. They dismiss personal agency and choice. And they say you're a slave to your genetics, and that is all that matters. And I think that is a part of the problem. That is a big part of the problem, where that's why they have such extreme views. I mean, have you had any conversations? Have you heard anything about any of this sort of stuff, John? Before I can talk more, but I want to give you a chance to jump in and pivot too.
Yeah, not personally with anyone that I know, but I've listened to people in the British Australian community and the National Observer and stuff like that, and all I keep hearing is this sort of stuff that we need to preserve, sort of whiteness and Anglo-Celtic. But what is that more than a word or then just a part of your DNA? To me, we're to say that one person can represent cultural values, but another can't because of their ethnic origins. To me, that's devaluing another person just based on their skin. It doesn't make any sense.
So it is. This is where the nuance has to come in, right? Because groups like the BAC, I think, are trying to do good work. I don't think they're sort of super ethno-nationalist, but they also want to say, and I think their fight is more against the multiculturalism and saying, hey, why are we allowing multiculturalism to erase our culture? Why are we dismissing the efforts, the achievements? Why are we rewriting the history of the world against British Australians? Why is there such a negativity against? So, they're obviously making stands against. Why are we renaming everything? Why are we taking down signs? Why are we allowing Captain Cook statues to be torn down and never put back? So I think there is more there. So because ultimately, again, and this is where it's hard and why nuance and conversation is required. And people just hear a soundbite, or I do a 15-minute video and I clip 60 seconds and put on Instagram and cop it because people don't take the context. And I appreciate that you do watch the full stuff, but people of Anglo heritage have a place as well, and it's okay to value and enjoy things and recognize those achievements. But often we're being told no, and this is that multicultural thing I said early on, where we're being suppressed in order of raising up the multiculture, and that's what gets people offside. As far as the whiteness and ability to be Australian, depending on whiteness, I think again, just humans are good at pattern recognition. We stereotype for reasons, and often stereotypes are true because that's by how they become stereotypes, right? Because they fit a general sort of 80-20 rule. And historically, prior to World War II, prior to 747s, we didn't have huge numbers of people moving from country to country. In the history of the world, people generally didn't move more than, 25 kilometers from where they were born. They generally stayed put because, family farms, property, whatever jobs, they stayed in their community. That's it. Then all of a sudden the world became smaller with commercial airliners and so on. And I think that kicked off more migration. And so then you did, after World War II, get a lot more ethnic blending where you had people that might look different moving to a country. And then, now with 2, 3, 4 generations past that, And there's been so much of that over the last 50 years. Just looking at someone at their skin color is no longer as reliable an indicator as to who they are and where they're from as it was 50 years ago. So, and I think that's something that people miss. They just go, oh, okay, black person, brown person, light brown, white, and they make these assumptions because, 100 years ago that might have been mostly true. But now it's less true. It's not that it's not ever true, and it still might be true a lot of the time, but you can't rely on it quite the same way that you once could.
Definitely. And I think as we're thinking about cultural values, because that's what sort of brings us together in terms of a nation or a country, I think we should talk about the role that Christianity has played, because Christianity has been our foundation rock. Like, some people like to think of different nations as Christian nations or not Christian nations, but I think the values that formed our documents, like the Constitution and the justice system and those sort of systems, have been based pretty clearly. It's been pretty clearly based on Christian values. And in the last 20, especially in the last 10 years, Christianity has dropped dramatically. And I think, especially that maybe whether it was like genuine Christianity or not, that's another question. But cultural Christianity has dropped hugely in the last 10, 20 years. What role do you think that's played in what we're seeing now with multiculturalism and the brokenness of our society? And maybe why do you think that?
Big question, mate. Big question. As far as like why is Australia leaving God? And yeah, I mean, if you look at the ABS stats, and I think I actually in my video on this, I did misreference the chart legend. We have nearly the same number of people that say no religion as say Christianity now. So we went from sort of, normally 70, 80% people aligning with Christianity on the census 40 years ago, to now barely 40, like not even 50% of that. I think it's like 48, 50% say nominally Christian, but the non-Christian line is coming up rapidly to meet it, and they're going to intersect very soon. And then you've got other religions from the world coming up around sort of 5 to 10%. And I think if you think like people have, and this is a sort of religious Christian point of view, I think that people have a God-shaped hole in their heart, and they need to fill it with something. And if they don't turn to the Creator for that, then they turn to something else. And Marxism fills that with all kinds of things like identity, politics, and so on that they can fill it with to make them feel important. I think a lot of people that get on board with some of the climate change stuff, they're seeing the planet as their God, and that's their religion. And so I don't want to stray off the multiculturalism thing, but I mean, people have found different things to revere and respect and find their identity in, whereas Christians, we find our identity in salvation from a loving God through the death of Jesus and resurrection of Jesus on the cross. And so because our identity is founded in grace, that alters our mindset, that alters how we think about things, that alters, or it should alter, how we think about people and so on. I mean, we know, if you haven't read it, I can't highly recommend enough the book Humilitas by John Dixon. So for your audience as well, if you want to know a little bit about the monumental impact that Jesus had on the history of the world and Western culture, read this book Humilitas. It's a short book, quick read. John's an excellent writer. And he basically talks about how prior to Christianity, might makes right was the order of the day. Power was everything. And people were basically not here. Like this whole, without God, we would still believe in like the value of life and in humanity. But the reality is we didn't. If you go back to Roman times and so on, they didn't think that human life was worth anything if that person hadn't accrued power or influence. And Jesus came, and humility was not a virtue. Humility was weakness. If you had to humble yourself before the emperor, like it was a negative concept, this concept of humility. But then when Jesus came and established this concept of servant leadership, and his Christian disciples apostled out to the world and spread that out, and the church grew, it fundamentally changed the dynamic of the entire world from that point on. And so when you get the atheists and people saying, we don't need to believe in some imaginary man in the sky to know that life is valuable, actually, yes, you do. And so what we've seen from a multicultural point of view, and leaving God behind as a society, is we are reverting back to being more self-centered, less thinking of others, more fearful, and like we are reverting back to that mindset as a culture, as a society, the further we drift from God.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen throughout the different empires, and we've seen the Roman Empire during the Middle Ages, during the rise of the Western empires, Christianity was always there lifting up human rights and values that have formed those empires. And then when they've rejected those ideals, that's when they've come collapsing down. And I think a lot of different belief systems have to rely on Christianity to build up their systems, because they don't have a foolproof system of belief in that regard. And I think as we begin to sort of wrap up, I think maybe the second last question I'm thinking of is, do you think we can revive or maybe form a new Australian culture? Because as you said before, the Australian culture that was being built that didn't have much opportunity to form properly it's been poured into, and now it's sort of a hybrid, and we don't really have what we used to have back in the day. Do you think it's still possible to build up a good Australian culture based on what you're saying?
I think it's an uphill battle. I like in all honesty, I don't think there's an easy path forward for it. I think it is going to be very difficult, and it does need to be led from the top by our national leadership, whoever that happens to be. It's not going to be Albanese. Let's face it, he's not the man for the job. I don't think it was Peter Dutton. I'm not sure that anyone sitting in Parliament right now is necessarily the right person. I don't know where that leader may or may not come from, but the issue there's a few issues against a revival or a rebooting of culture compared to what we had in the olden days. And one of that is that fragmentation of media and splinterization of media. So again, back in the way old days, we had 4 TV channels, and everyone was watching one of 4 things every night of the week. And so from a cultural touch points point of view, everyone was kind of synced up. Percentage of the audience would watch this show for like Sale of the Century, and then A Country Practice, and whatnot, and so another group would be watching the ABC News and Four Corners or whatever, and another group would be watching game shows on another channel, or Friends or whatever it was. So you'd have everyone was kind of similarly aligned over these similar things, and then big events, sports events, news events, etc. Everyone watched the same things because that's all we had. Now with streaming media, social media, all these things, it's much harder for people to have that common alignment across things. I think the closest thing we've seen in the last 5 years was when everyone watched Tiger King at the start of COVID, because all of a sudden everyone was locked at home and this Tiger King thing popped up, and everyone watched Tiger King and everyone knew about it and everyone was talking about it. We don't have as much of that anymore. So as far as trying to establish Australian culture, it's harder. I mean, the cricket was on all the time on Channel 9. And through summer, there wasn't necessarily much else on during the day, so people would just watch the cricket more than anything else. A lot of Australians don't care about cricket. Not everyone's ever cared about cricket. You don't have to love cricket to be Australian, but I'm just saying there's a lot of those mechanics that existed in olden times, and when I say olden times, within my lifetime, that are not there anymore, not in the same way. And so, without strong leadership from the top that resonates, without a mainstream media that actually wants to get on board and promote positive Australian culture versus revisionist history, it's going to be tough. And, and independent media, podcasts like what I'm trying to do on Dave Right Now, and other guys that are on social media doing stuff, we don't have the audience. Australia, they're not there. They're too busy. They're not tuning into a lot of this kind of stuff, sadly, which means it's hard to attract sponsors. And without sponsors, it's hard to grow. And without growth, you're not going to get more eyeballs. So it's really hard building any kind of critical mass to become a sort of, a fourth rail new media here in Australia. So I think as far as like what is a new Australia, what do people want? Everyone's so divided. We've got so many Marxists out there now, even if they don't realize they're Marxists. The number of people addicted to government welfare programs and handouts, the sort of mass sense of victimhood with and limiting self of personal responsibility and agency that seems to be getting out there. It's certainly harder. And then as you pour more people in, it makes people feel more victimized and they're less likely because, and look, I get it. I mean, I'm lucky to be old enough that, you know, I managed to sneak into the mortgage zone before I got out of reach. And many people can't do that. My kids aren't going to be able to do that unless I can swing being able to help them. But not every kid's going to have that either. Yeah. And so I get the defeatist attitude of some people that just, you know, they go, well, what is the future? And I would say to people that are feeling really lost about it, is the future is trust God. And that doesn't mean you'll have material wealth. It doesn't mean that we'll have all the things that, you know, the world tells us to have, but you will have a relationship with God and eternal life through that. So, I mean, that's the balance. When everything's hopeless, where do you turn? Well, people either turn to themselves, they turn to drugs, they turn to other things, or they could turn to God. And hopefully, if more people turn to God, hopefully the worse things get, maybe we will see a revival of Christianity. We will see church attendance grow. We will see people turn to God out of this. And maybe that is the blessing that comes from this, that people will realize that there's something bigger and better out there, and they seek that, and their lives can be transformed through that.
Definitely. I think we're seeing a little bit of that with the Gen Z men, so hopefully that picks up and keeps going. And I think as a final question, just to sort of summarize what we've talking about, maybe give a short definition of what do you think it means to be an Australian? In modern Australia, Susan Lee likes to say.
Oh, no, don't even. Why would you even go there? Killing me, man. I don't want one in Australia. I want classic Aussie back. We had such a good thing. And this is the thing. I think Australians, and it's one of those things. It's kind of like, what is a woman? Like, you've never had to explain. Or when we had the marriage debate a few years ago, like why is marriage only? It just is. You don't need to explain it. It's just been. And so guys like me that have lived through it, we like sense what Australian is. And, you know, even like someone does something that acts like a bullfed, and you go, that's un-Australian. You like, you say those things. But then when you've got to define what an Australian is, I think this is still something I haven't fully worked out how to articulate tightly, which is why I'm, you know, filling here while my brain ticks over. Australians have this strong sense of she'll be right, and not in that, and I think it's been abused over the years. The she'll be right attitude has gone into, oh, we don't have to worry about anything because she'll be right. And, you know, and the subversive elements have come in and taken advantage of that. But I think it's the sense of loyalty and mateship. I mean, that mateship is a key term you hear about Australia and Australians. That sense of really being there for each other goes back to, you know, the Anzacs and the Diggers, being there for your friends and your neighbours. But we've lost that sense of community. We are more fractured. People have less mates. So I think if we get back to some of that, I think larrikinism is really important. Being not afraid to have a laugh, don't take yourself too seriously. Tall poppy used to mean that. Tall poppy syndrome meant to be, if someone's getting a bit too big for their boots, you pay them out a little bit. And now it's actually turned into an anti-success thing. So tall poppy means if someone's successful, you want to tear them down, which is horrific. That is so terrible for our nation. We want to encourage success. We want to encourage achievement. But because now tall poppy has been perverted, we have this sort of anti-success thing. And you see this with the Greens, talking about taxing the rich and this and that and the other. So now success has become a bad thing. So I think we want to get back to, you know, we can do it. Like give it a crack. Yeah, like give it a go. Work hard. Be there. Support each other. Have a laugh while you're doing it. Don't take yourself too seriously, but that also doesn't mean don't care. So, yeah, if I had to try and think of a few key elements that I think we would love to have in there, I think that would be good. And, you know, obviously we were born out of, British common law and Christian values. And so law and order is actually a critical part of being an Australian. Australian culture is respect for law and order, respect for others' property, like all those sort of core tenets like that, which we're seeing when we see some of these sort of third world immigrants come in. They don't respect law and order. They don't respect other people's property. They don't respect individual, like, bodily autonomy and all these sort of things. Like they are violent and abusive and running around with machetes and disrupting people and doing all these sorts of things. So I'm stacking as we go through here, but yeah. And I would like to say Christian values overall. Christian values. Now, whether we're not going to see a nation that's 100% Christian until Jesus comes back, and then he's going to take us all away anyway. But yeah, I think that would be a good foundation. Sort of Christian values, law and order, respect for one another, respect for others, larrikinism, mateship. I think that'll do.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, Dave, thanks so much for coming on. I've really appreciated this discussion. I think it's one that our country really needs to have if we want to be successful and move on in a positive way. Yeah, do you want to just share where people can find you and how they can follow you and see all your stuff?
Yeah, thanks, John. And just to round out what you said there, I agree. I think we need to have the conversation, as I say all the time, on both my own platform, DaveRightNow, and also on another podcast I do called The Awakened Aussies, just to blend the plug in there. We need to have the conversations. We've been told for too long you can't say these things. You can't ask that question because that makes you a racist, a bigot, a homophobe, a transphobe, whatever slur they want to throw at you just for saying, what has happened to society? What is going on? Have the conversations. Normalize the conversations while we still can, because, speech is continually being impounded on. We're seeing more social media laws, hate speech laws, etc. Have the conversations, start with one person, start with a friend, start with a family member, build it out. But the more people have these conversations, the more they go, it's okay to ask these questions. It's normalizing the conversation. And hopefully then people don't need to be pushed to these fringe extremist groups where they're just going to, be indoctrinated into actually worse ideas and worse solutions. The problem with a lot of extremist groups is they identify and accurately the problem. They diagnose things accurately, but their prescription is just off the chart. So, DaveRightNow.com is where I put all my show notes for all the content that I do. You can look me up on any social media. Look up Dave Right Now. Mostly long formish, like topical stuff on YouTube. Occasionally, I clip stuff onto Insta and TikTok, or I'm hanging out on X probably far more than I ought to.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming on.
Thanks, John. Been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining us on the Here I Stand podcast. You can find more about the Young Conservatives for Christ at youngconservativesforchrist.com, and all this information will be in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.